Excellent. Well, good morning. I'm Peter Hirshberg. You know, new is the business that Silicon Valley is in. We know this innately, we accept it. But it turns out that there are some parts of our culture that when you introduce the new and the miraculous, you cause a lot of mischief. Which is why Josette and I would like to talk to you today about that place where art and technology meet. Actually, it's a meeting that took place early on January 7th, 1879. Louis Daguerre, an artist, unveils photography. The public is delighted at this new thing. So you'd figure that the French avant-garde, the TEDsters of the day, if you will, would just be thrilled as well. You'd be wrong. Charles Baudelaire, the bad boy of French literature, a rebel who's always pushing the limits, did not take it well. Now, this is the guy who penned the eternally edgy Fleur de Mal, the guy who wrote that, personally, I think men and women know from birth that all pleasure lies in evil. Baudelaire, upon seeing new media for the first time, wrote, if photography is allowed to supplement art in some of its functions, it will soon have supplemented or corrupted it altogether. Or to put this in a form more relevant today, it was a hell of a diss. He went all caps. He threw a fit. You get the point. By the way, it turns out you don't need hardware and fancy chemicals to piss off the cultural elite. Case in point, April 29, 1874, Claude Monet and school launch Impressionism. Big stuff. An entire new platform. Reid Hoffman would have called it an ecosystem. And in retrospect, it was up there with iTunes. And like iTunes, Impressionism had reviews. The French Academy wrote, this school does away with two things, line, without which it's impossible to reproduce any form, animate or inanimate, and color, which gives the appearance of reality. Dirty 3/4 of the canvas with black and white, rub the rest with yellow, dot it with red and blue dots at randoms, and you'll have an impression of spring before which the initiates will swoon in ecstasy. To those of you who've been through successive product introductions, you know the drill. Each new generation, same skeptics, same problems, same adoption curve. 1968, the first computer art show, The Establishment Freaks, which they did a lot of in 1968. Fast forward to today. You know, on the one hand, there are artists doing an amazing amount of work with the principles we all stand for. Openness, emergence, network organic systems, interpreting a world that creates 15 petabytes of data a day. And on the other hand, there's we in Silicon Valley driving a lot of this, but not knowing about it. We're trying to bring that together. Don't take it from me. Listen to one of the first artists in San Francisco who brought art and technology together 30 years ago. She sounds like an entrepreneur trying to get the world to understand. Lynn Hirschman.
Nobody thought it was art. I could tell you that for sure. And they didn't know what, in fact, they didn't know what it was. And they didn't know how to look at it. It was a completely new genre. It didn't fit into any funding categories. It didn't fit into any critique categories. So nobody could write about it. They didn't know how to use it. They thought they had been previously taught not to interact, not to touch anything. So it kind of violated everything that we knew about art in art history up to that time, and consequently it was shunned because people simply did not want to deal with something that was so radical, and it was shunned for at least 25 years, in fact.
Well, this is why Josette and I created the Gray Area Foundation of the Arts, because just as Silicon Valley is so friendly to startup creation, we think this place is pretty special in creating movements.
I grew up in a low-income family, and I was never exposed to the arts as a child. The first time I stepped foot in a museum was when I packed my car the day after I graduated college and left and moved next to Balboa Park in San Diego. The moment I walked into a museum, I knew I was an art and social entrepreneur. The Gray Area is a collective of hackers, designers, artists, social entrepreneurs. It's a hybrid organization. It's a hub for ideas to grow. We actively remove labels and create multidisciplinary creative exchange. You can go ahead and change that.
Sure.
This is, Gray Area is situated in the Tenderloin District. This is a marquee that was on our building. So for From the 1920s, the building that we were in was a porn theater. So the only use that it's had is a porn arcade. So the art theaters is a euphemism for porn arcade. We've now been able to use it as a literal sense for art and technology. We've aligned with the Tenderloin Economic Development Project, a citywide effort to create an arts district with Taylor Street as its spine. This is the space that we've created. So we've actually formed a 4,000 square foot former porn theater into a digital arts center.
So one of our founding artists is this guy, Aaron Koblin, who has worked at Yahoo, now he's at Google, but he's also of the Museum of Modern Art and Radiohead. Visualization is a really interesting way of telling the story. This is a project that Aaron did with MIT, taking IP data coming out of New York and visualizing how it goes around the world. And actually, when you start zooming in on this, you start seeing the connections between the boroughs of New York and the countries of the world. Students at MIT are doing graduate theses learning more about economic flows from this emergent data than even things that the World Bank knows. Well, just as you could look at these economic things, you can actually use digital patterns to show the more emotive side of the human experience. These are SMS messages from Amsterdam. You can see at night they go down, by day they come up. And on New Year's Eve, at that moment that we celebrate, you see something extraordinary, which is this collective human emotion to celebrate about 1,000-fold. Aaron also used Amazon's Mechanical Turk. Here is a work called Sheep Market, in which thousands of people were asked to draw a sheep facing left, a Mechanical Turk. Having no idea why, it came together in a work of art. It turns out many of them felt exploited. They said, we didn't know you were going to take our work. And other people who didn't get to do it were pissed because they couldn't be part of it.
This is Casey Rios. He's the founder of Processing, which is an open source programming language. He was actually in our inaugural show in October. I mean, he's also the Media Arts Chair at the UCLA Design and Media Arts Center. The open source community has become quite a movement among artists and techies through the Processing open source language. This is a piece that he unveiled at our opening show. It was called Surface. His work is based on biological algorithms and creates beautiful forms, as you can see in this piece. We also have been producing workshops and education to engage and teach the community processing. So it's interesting to note that these sold-out workshops have been attended by educators, artists, entrepreneurs, and now CCA is taking our curriculum and implementing it into their program.
This is really where a lot of the mashup of communities occur. At a class like this, you have people from the finance community that use processing, artists, you have techies using it, and it's fun to see that's how culture changes. And Josette's style is very much about curating groups from the bottom up, not like the top-down stentorian curator of yore. Maps, visual displays also turn out to be important, and also there's a real kinship between the open government data movement and art. We created the Stamen Map Room, working with Stamen Design, to take a look at information about our community. These are cabs from cab data, from actually locational data in the Tenderloin. It turns out many cabs drop people off. It's tougher to find one. Here's a visualization that shows cabs throughout the Bay Area. It was actually created in Processing. But because this is TED, a place of gravitas, I decided to take this clip and add a little bit of Philip Glass. I have a theory, if you add Philip Glass to anything, it becomes very important. So, a piece by Gabriel Dunn.
Philip Glass, that's so old school, Peter. Don't you think techno would be more fitting to this visualization? Peter showed you San Francisco visualization. Let's see a visualization of the entire Bay Area set to a minimal techno track, Wignomi Brothers.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
So Stamen they created crimespotting.org. They're the people who got Oakland to eventually open up their data to create government APIs that have led to the kind of the API wars, if you will, between New York and Chicago and other cities. We express this. This is all of the crime that goes on in the Tenderloin, different color codes for different kinds of crime. When you look at the data, you find interesting things. Junkies don't like hills. It rolls off as you go uphill. I was actually personally worried when we were first working on this. Josette sent these over, and I'm like, the community's going to hate us. All we're going to do is a bunch of, like, people come in and we show crime. And what I learned was, it's not a secret to them. It actually facilitates conversation. This is where art and data and conversation happen, to the point that when the police came in, they were just thrilled because they were having conversations with the community.
Tenderloin Dynamic is a collaborative project that Gray Area worked with Stamen Design on. It's an interactive urban study. So what it does is it takes a look at San Francisco as a whole and then visualizes data points. So you can see through, this is it installed within the gallery. So we had people talking about the different data sets that were incorporated into this piece.
And this is actually going to be on the web as a product introduction or a piece of art in January. It turns out, if you're in the digital art space, you have to rethink the model of what is art, how it's shared. So this is kind of an example of it. So here we'll zoom in on the city, and maybe we'll be interested in rental listings. So rental listings come up. And it turns out that this is actually Craigslist data. It turns out if you mash that up, say, with other data, for example, building permits, it starts to give you a sense for where the city's been and where the city's growing. Or you could mash up, say, crimes and rental listings. It's very fun to kind of open this and let people play. So this is one form, more of the data side of things. But there's the more creative, expressive music, visual side of this as well.
This is another project that we've just created. It hasn't launched. It will launch in January. It's called Sequence. It's a collaborative music ecosystem. It's by Ryan Alexander, Gabriel Dunn, and Daniel Massey. And they were actually a few of the resident artists that were in our residency program at GAFFTA.
Can we take a look at it?
Yes, let's do that.
So each of these little genetic-looking things are sequences created by people, thrown into this soup and shared. So you create a piece of music, I pick it up, I match it up, I change it. This is kind of how it's authored. Now I'm going in and I'm beginning to create one of these little organisms to then throw it out into the community.
So this is a 16 by 16 step sequencer with the y-axis being time and the x-axis being frequency. So those are different waveforms, and then you see the visual form on your left-hand side.
The act of creating this was a bit of a microcosm of some of the business model issues that the media world has and rub up against art. I saw this and I said, great, we can get a sponsor. That'll help pay for it. Gabriel Dunn said, I'm an open source guy. No way, but maybe we could have people pay for it. And then we said, we need an audience. It has to be free.
So this is the 7 storefronts that Gray Area will eventually live in. We're actually creating the first media art center, so the first art and technology center in San Francisco. The left-hand side was the porn theater. You see 65 Club, that was a previous, since the Merchant Marines, or Merchant Seamen, that was a bar, so since the 20s. And then on the end is a liquor store, and there's an interesting story about that. The liquor store actually, the residents came together and organized and went to City Hall and actually got them to move across the street and form a produce market. In the Tenderloin, there aren't many produce markets for the residents. There's actually not a grocery store, so it was a really big move. So we'll be expanding and changing the liquor store, the club, and the porn arcade into a digital art center.
We have kind of this lovely kind of local mission that we've been talking about, but a broader one, because if you're telling stories about technology and art and on the internet, you have a broad story. This summer we're collaborating with MIT to take a look at data and cities and visualization and a bunch of projects that actually engage communities and change cities. Privacy is going to be a really interesting theme to play with. And we're doing more and more studio space where people create things, and sometimes it's tough to see the difference between a startup and an art project, but that's a lot of the fun of this.
So the field's so new. The kinship of menu selection, remixing, sampling, synthesis, open sourcing, and contemporary culture calls for a whole new kind of institution. And as Lev Manovich has said, a critical vocabulary to adequately describe these operations. There are multiple variations and combinations, and that's what we're about.
And as someone who's been around Silicon Valley for years, it's interesting to almost evaluate this in terms of the values and what we do. Josette's a great entrepreneur, and from a management style is all about collecting and collaborating groups of people and letting them emergently come together and create stuff. It's just not top-down. We have a built-in social mission, not unlike the kind of stuff that Reed was talking about, because this architecture pulls for collaboration, and it pulls for open source. It pulls for playing with kind of business model years. And these are really ideas whose time have come. What's been bubbling up in the valley for 50 years is now overflowing into the art world today. And it's an exciting time to be at the confluence of this and draw on this community, our Silicon Valley community, as part of this amazing mix where change and art and technology are coming together. Thanks very much.
Thank you.